Sky blue text over a dark blue background. Aspire. Powered by Possible. Inclusive Hiring Essentials. Foundational steps for recruiting, employing, and retaining people with disabilities. At center, the speaker, at right, an ASL interpreter signs. During the panel, the view shifts to show speakers in 2 rows.
Hello, and welcome to Inclusive Hiring Essentials presented by Aspire. I'm Claire Killey, Vice President of Digital Experiences at Aspire. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a white woman with mostly brown hair. I'm wearing a black and white top underneath a black blazer. And behind me is an image of Aspire's Weinberg Career Academy located in Hillside, Illinois. Today's program includes American Sign Language interpretation from First Choice Interpreting and real-time captioning from Efficiency Reporting. We encourage you to utilize the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen throughout the program to ask questions. We'll address as many of those as we can during our live Q&A portion. Please feel free also to utilize the chat to let our team know if you have any access issues. This program is being recorded and an accessible video will be made available after the event. At Aspire, we have a shared purpose: to be an ally to people with disabilities, working together to break down barriers, build new skills, and push the boundaries of what inclusivity can mean. We know that employment equity is achieved by removing barriers, embracing diversity, and championing inclusive practices that give every person the opportunity to succeed. Our conversation today will identify practical considerations that we hope will empower you and your companies to keep moving your inclusive hiring initiatives forward. It's our belief that in order to make progress, we have to practice vulnerability, empathy, and respect. So I want to take a moment now to intentionally acknowledge this virtual space as a safe space for all perspectives and points of view. So thank you all in advance for doing your part to honor this safe space. Today, we'll hear from a panel of business leaders across industries to help us think about setting foundations for effectively employing people with disabilities. But before we hear from our panel, I'm pleased to introduce our keynote guest, Matthew Shapiro, who will join us on screen now to share his top tips for inviting belonging in the workplace. Matthew, welcome.
Hello, good afternoon.
Please share your personal pronouns and a brief image description with us, Matthew.
Yes, of course. My pronouns are he, him. I am a white male who uses a wheelchair with light brown hair, wearing glasses. And then I have a blue shirt with green and white stripes on. And then behind me, I have a virtual background of a white bookshelf with different colored books and some plants and a couch. So I'm very happy to be here to have a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate you being here. And I'm so glad you're here with us today because I always appreciate your perspective. You and I have had so many conversations. And I love that not only are you running your own business, but you're working directly with businesses and government agencies to really move the needle on disability inclusion. So I'm hoping you can just start off by briefly telling us about your journey as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so in December of 2014, I had graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University, and I knew that I wanted to work in the disability space. And I had originally gone through the traditional opportunities for employment, right? You do job interviews, you look for jobs, you do all those things. And I had thought I had been doing well in job interviews, but I was never getting to the point where I was getting an offer for full-time employment. So in December of 2014, as most good ideas occur, when I was laying in bed one night, I got this idea to start my own disability consulting business. Up until that point in my career, I had done a ton of youth advocacy work. I had learned about self-determination and empowerment for people with disabilities. And I had been doing consulting and public speaking and policy work without really calling it that, right? And so I intentionally kind of took those 3 strengths and started Six Wheels Consulting. It's called Six Wheels because I'm a wheelchair user and there are 6 wheels on my wheelchair. And if there were less, it would mess up the branding, but we'll hope for the best anytime I get a new wheelchair. So I love being an entrepreneur. I love working with businesses, with really any entity to think about how we can be more inclusive beyond just being ADA compliant to people with disabilities. I kind of live by this idea of inclusion above compliance. And so hopefully we'll talk about that more throughout our conversation.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. And, you and I, every time we have our regular chats, we talk a lot about that idea of belonging and the intentionality that's really required, right, for true inclusion. And when we're thinking about hiring and employing people with disabilities, there's a really critical piece that's often overlooked, and that's what companies are doing to show the disability community that inclusion and access is a priority. That act of really inviting in the disability community through actions. So
Sure.
You've identified some, a few tips that will help companies think about this. So the first tip that you've identified is authentic representation of disability in images. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, great question. So I think it's really important to have marketing materials. And by marketing materials, I literally mean everything that an organization provides, be it brochures, be it websites, be it social media, any kind of imagery that is representative of the organization that a prospective hire would see. You need to have representation that includes genuine, authentic disability imagery on those pieces of collateral. Oftentimes, when we are showing disability inclusion, you may see instances of clip art where often an actor or an actress is placed in a position where they are supposed to be quote unquote representing disability. That's not true authentic representation of what people with disabilities live with, look like, and can achieve on a day-to-day basis. And so we need to be hiring people with disabilities to be part of our marketing materials. We need to show them and show, if I'm somebody with a service animal, it's truly someone with a service animal. The example I often use for me is, as a wheelchair user, my wheelchair is very modern and very much made for me. And so typically if you see wheelchair users from a clip art standpoint, right, it's that actor or actress put in a like a hospital style wheelchair and asked to portray using a wheelchair in that sense. And so thinking about what our imagery looks like is really, really important, because that'll draw people in. Like if I'm a prospective employee, the first thing I will look at is, does this organization represent me in an authentic way? And so our images are really important in that context.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it sounds like the key word is that authenticity, right? Making sure we're engaging the community. So Matthew, the second tip you identified is using inclusive language in job description. So tell me more about that.
Sure. So oftentimes when we're looking for jobs, right, we're looking for fits that are going to fit our work style, fit our personality, fit our diverse backgrounds, right? And if you look at a lot of job descriptions, you're going to see language that says we welcome all to apply. And if the language is done in a certain way, you're really truly implying that all means all, right? And so you're actually actively singling out. We want people of color. We want LGBTQIA folks. We want people with disabilities to apply for these roles. It's really important to be that intentional, because if somebody doesn't see, like, again, if I'm looking at a job description, if they don't see disability in that context, they might overlook that job opportunity. But if it's outwardly expressed that, like, yes, when we say all, we mean all, and here's who we mean, you are more than likely to get, well-qualified candidates who fit those backgrounds.
Thank you, Matthew. And the third tip that you have here is thinking about engaging the disability community, which is really a thread through everything you've said so far. But can you give some examples of what that looks like?
Yeah, so what I often hear from businesses a lot is, where do we find people with disabilities, and how do we engage with them, as you said? And it's a matter of tapping into a lot of different things, right? You as an organization could start do a disability specific job fair. You could connect with Aspire and other local organizations in your area to say, hey, we are intentionally looking for people with disabilities, to serve in these roles. And so where do we find them? So reach out to your disability community organizations in your area to say, hey, do you have talented people that are ready to work in an Aspire, in a Six Wheels Consulting, in an Ernst & Young, whatever organization you're looking for, to actively and purposefully recruit them into those job outcomes. I've said it a bunch in the three questions you've asked, but intentionality and being purposeful in setting up spaces and setting up opportunities for people with disabilities to become employed in our workspaces is vitally important.
Matthew, thank you so much for helping us set the stage for the conversation today. I know you're going to join us back in a bit.
Yes.
Really appreciate these thoughts and your top tips for inviting belonging. So thank you so much, Matthew. We'll see you back in a bit for the Q&A.
Sounds good. Can't wait to hear the rest of the panel.
Thank you. So at this time, I'm pleased to introduce our panelists and invite them to join us on screen. So while our panelists are joining us on screen, just so you know, you can access the full bios for each of today's guests by referring to the link we're sharing in the chat. We're going to take just a few minutes for some introductions, and then we're going to dive into our discussion. So panelists, I'm going to have each of you share your pronouns, a brief image description, and an overview of your work as it relates to inclusive employment. So we're going to give each of you a minute or two to move through those pieces. And first up, I like to welcome, and I'm just going to pause for one moment and make sure that we have all of our panelists with us on screen. So we'll give a moment for that. Wonderful. Hello, everyone. So first up, I'd like to introduce Daryl Castellano, Vice President of Global Inclusion, Diversity, and Engagement at WESCO International. Welcome, Daryl.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. I'm very proud to be representing the WESCO team here. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And a brief description of my apparel. I'm wearing a gray suit jacket, a black shirt. I'm sitting in front of one of our ABLE teams backgrounds, which shows a little conference room with some water bottles on the table. So really, really proud to be here. WESCO is an electrical distribution company with 800 branches in 50 countries around the world. We've got around 20,000 employees. And my role as the Vice President of Inclusion, Diversity, and Engagement really started in earnest around 2020, where we started this journey of inclusion and diversity. And we call it a journey, and it's, we are infants in this space, we admit that. And I've actually learned so much already from Matthew and from companies like Aspire, and so is the company. And we are not shameful in saying that we are stealing shamelessly from companies that are doing this great, because we are in this journey. And we like to say that we are, we kind of crawl before we can walk, before we can run, before we can fly. And we created 4 business resource groups in 2021 to help us understand what it means to be inclusive and engaging for the various constituencies of diversity. We purposefully left our disability BRG to the last, that we actually launched that in 2022. And the reason for that is that we wanted to learn from the other BRGs, which were for, one's called Mosaic for our Black, Latino, Indigenous people of color. We got one for Volt, which is our military members. We have one for WIN, our Women's Impact Network. That 3. Anyway, and so the 5th one we had is called ABLE, and we're really proud of that. And the reason why we wanted to keep it to the last is that we knew that we had to be intentional, like Matthew said. There were some things that we needed to do as an organization to become inclusive for people with disabilities, and it involves a lot of education and really looking at our internal biases, looking at how accessible we are. So we'll talk about this a little later, but the BRG is really helping us, fulfill those goals of becoming more of an accessible environment for our employees. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Daryl. So glad you're with us. And I know you're going to talk more about that later. So thank you for telling us more about WESCO and who you are. Next up, I'd like to welcome Katie Hench, co-founder and CEO of Infiniteach. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Claire, and thanks everyone for putting this on. What a great turnout. What an important cause to be talking about. My name is Katie Hench. My pronouns are she, her, and a quick visual description. I am a white 40-ish woman with slightly longer than shoulder length, light brown hair, and I have a pink shirt and a blue blazer, and I'm sitting in a very sterile white semi-soundproof room. I'm really excited to be here to talk about this. As Claire mentioned, I'm the CEO and co-founder of InfiniTeach. And at InfiniTeach, we are a consultation and technology firm that focuses on accessibility and inclusion projects. And our kind of even more niche focus is thinking about individuals with autism, the autistic community, as well as neurodiversity and other similar intellectual and developmental disabilities. So that kind of ranges, right? We work with some partners, museums, Shed and the Field Museum, for example, here in Chicago, larger corporations like Alaska Airlines. We help them kind of look at, the customer experience, the client experience, and think about ways that we can make that more accessible and inclusive to the autistic community. We also, and the reason we're here today, have a big emphasis on inclusive employment. And we ourselves are a neurodiverse team. And so this obviously is something that's very near and dear to not only our mission and the work that we're doing, but also to our lives. And so we're very passionate about this. And really excited to be here today. And thank you all for kind of this emphasis and this focus that you're putting on hiring more inclusively.
Thank you, Katie. Next, please welcome Jennifer Price, also known as JP, manager of Neurodiverse Center of Excellence in Chicago for Ernst & Young. Welcome, JP.
Thank you so much, Claire. I'm Jennifer Price, but I go by JP because it's quicker. I use she, her pronouns, and I present to you today with imperfectly curled blonde hair, a green sweater, and a vest that says EY and the acronym PEPL because we promote people at EY. My background is has a logo. We say Better Working World. And it's a bit of a blurry mosaic. As we talk, you'll find that I sometimes, if you see me visually, I will look away as I think. I will stutter. It is the way I operate and communicate. So thank you in advance for your patience with me.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, JP. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
And finally, please welcome Carlos Terrazas, Disability Inclusion Manager at McDonald's Corporation. Welcome, Carlos.
Hi, everybody. It's such an honor to, have the prestige opportunity to be with you all and with this panel. I'm Carlos Terrazas. I am the Disability Inclusion Manager at McDonald's. My pronouns are he, him. A quick visual description. I am a male or Latino male with dark brownish hair and facial hair. I'm sitting in our headquarters office with a white background, and I have a bluish color blazer with a white shirt. And I lead our disability inclusion initiatives across our company and in the 39,000 locations that we sit worldwide. So a little bit of the work I do is very internal focus on employees and kind of what brings us together here in this panel is talking about inclusive employment and how to really create a robust system to ensure that the employee, or starting from the applicant to the candidate to the employee experience being subpar and inclusive. So I will speak more on that later and some of the things that we've achieved at McDonald's so far, and look forward to sharing that with you in the next few minutes.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So glad to have you all here with us. And before we jump in, just a quick reminder to our audience that we do have that live Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's active now, so feel free to submit any questions there, and we will address as many of those as we can. So as we kind of start to move into our discussion, I just want to say what I appreciate most about this conversation today, and so Daryl was sort of getting to this earlier, is that each of you and your companies are at very different points on your forward path of disability inclusion. And I think this is really important because the fact is no one has it perfect, right? We all have room for growth. So our goal here is to showcase examples of progress and really learn from one another, because that's what we have to be doing to move forward. So although everyone here brings a different perspective, we all have something in common, at least one thing, and that is we all understand that disability is diversity. And I want to point to a quote from the CEO of Global Disability Inclusion, Meg O'Connell, who said, "It's time to stop calling people with disabilities a minority group and instead refer to us as the world's largest diversity segment." So this is why we're here today and why this conversation is so important. So I'm really eager to hear more about each of you, your initiatives, and your progress. And I want to just kind of connect back to some of Matthew's points on inviting belonging. You know, he really highlighted some of those different ways that intentionality, authenticity, and those inclusive practices can really help us get candidates in the door. And so I want to come to you, Katie, first to kind of continue on this thread, because I know at InfiniTeach, you've been really thoughtful about honing in on individual strengths and also utilizing community partnerships to really expand your team. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So I mentioned we're a neurodiverse team, and to Matthew's point, and to Claire, what you said, that is done very intentionally. I'm excited to be here today because our mission at InfiniTeach is to provide consults and technology, specifically to this community. But what I really appreciate are all the businesses and organizations that are here, that this is not necessarily part of your mission, but you're realizing that this diversity segment, this largest diversity segment, is an asset as employees. And I think that's just a huge kind of shift in the mindset that and I just want to echo, I guess, on the pipeline discussion, a few things that Matthew brought up. But I think that shift in mindset really presents some really big trust signals out there to the disability community. And especially we see in the autism space that too often these are individuals who have felt judged in the past, who have failed at job interviews in the past, who, their level of trust with putting themselves out there and trying to find employment, it can be pretty low. And so you as a company are going to have to compensate for that and say, these are really strong employees. These, we want these candidates in our pipeline. And so how do we put out stronger trust signals to make sure that they know they are welcome and encouraged to apply to our company, to our business? So Matthew already said a bunch. I think partnering with social service organizations such as Aspire, there are places throughout Chicagoland, throughout the state, that are working really hard to place autistic adults in employment. And so find those places. It is a perfect match, right? They're looking to place, you're looking to find employees, reach out. And I think that you'll find that they're really receptive. One of our employees, we offered a paid internship through a local vocational high school, which serves students up to age 22. And so that was a great way for us to kind of vet candidates, was having those paid internship opportunities. I think also thinking through job descriptions, like Matthew said, putting that inclusive language into job descriptions. I'm also a really big proponent of doing a trial day or having a video job description, right? Because so many times our candidates that come from the autism community or come from the neurodiversity community need to know more than what the workload is going to be. They also need to know, what is the environment I'm going to be working in? What are my coworkers like? Who is the person I'm reporting to? Like, how do we do a better job than just having a written job description that maybe isn't the best match for those candidates? How do we really kind of show them what this job and what this culture looks like? So those are, I think, pipeline wise, just some quick ideas, doing things like this, building your network, connecting with all of us on LinkedIn. And then when you do have a job posting, we can help put it out to our networks. Like that is, again, that, kind of intentionality that Matthew mentioned, I think is critical when it comes to building your pipeline. And then once you have that pipeline built, I think to Claire's other question was, how do we match strengths of these individuals that are coming in the door with the right jobs? And I just always think of this as, a Venn diagram. I think this is true for all employees, but especially true for those that come from the autism community. When we think of where interests and skill set overlap, that's where we have a really, really strong candidate. So one of our employees, his hobby, his favorite thing to do is modding and video games. And what we thought when we thought he's a great fit for our organization, where can we put him? We immediately thought of our technology and thinking of the apps that we develop and the websites that we develop, and how can he use that interest of creating, images for video games and mods for video games, but then apply it to our work environment where we need videos and images and assets in all of that technology. So again, it's a lot of digging in that interview process, but if you can find that sweet spot where interest and skill set overlap, I think you just have a really great match and a really committed employee.
Thank you so much, Katie. Yeah, those are great examples. And I think, you're really hitting on that critical piece of, again, I like that word, signaling to the community, that you see and recognize the disability community and what people need from you to understand that you are a place of belonging. And I think another really critical piece to this process is ensuring that new hires continue to have that feeling of belonging, right? From before they're in the door to the hiring process and as employees. And a big piece of that is ensuring access continually in the workplace. So Carlos, I want to come to you next. I know at McDonald's, you really focused on developing a centralized accommodation process. So tell us more about why that's been so important at McDonald's.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And Katie, you touched on some very great points, so thanks for sharing all those. So while we do, we just like anybody else, have the ambition of building out the pipeline and really focus on disability recruiting and whatnot. When I came to the organization, I did a lot of kind of benchmarking and understanding where we were, et cetera. And I thought that, for us to actively recruit people with disabilities, we know most disabled people will need an accommodation to, have an equitable experience, both as an applicant, a candidate, or an employee. So I thought, while we did have, and most companies do, especially large corporations, they follow an accommodation process. I just didn't think, we had the right mindset when we were accommodating. It was very law abiding, right? Like, compliance, check the list, kind of, provide that accommodation, but the experience wasn't great, or, it was very inconsistent, etc. So I embarked on centralizing really an accommodation process, and not only centralizing, that process to a team of SMEs, but also ensuring that to remove a stigma, both from an employee or a hiring manager or a people manager, etc., is to also centralize funding. So there is a significant amount of money to pay for accommodations. So really what we embarked on is to one, create a robust process where employees, for example, can self-request an accommodation through their own portal, like employee portal, and really then go on to a team of experts who are not sitting with talent. They're sitting on on their own function, and not going to be biased about what accommodation you're requesting and how that might impact work, whatever. They're going to have the most employee experience when requesting this accommodation. And truthfully, it's having that interactive process where you kind of assess each request individually, and you don't have, you check the list, or you check the box, sorry, and then you move on to the next step without like even having a human interaction. So we created this process and this funding mechanism. So it really has helped remove the stigma that employees might face, especially like those employees who might acquire a disability while working, or might have a temporary disability come up. So that process will alleviate some of that stigma, and then really where we're seeing it mostly is with applicants, because while we did have a process before, now it's directed to a team that is fully assessing these requests, rather than in like most companies, it directs them to a recruiter, who the recruiter might not really know how to handle that, and then they'll take it to either an HR person or a legal partner, etc. So delays the process and the experience. So now it's directed to that team, and that has created a more fulfilled experience, and allowed for us to kind of also track what we're seeing. And in the future, if we're seeing the same consistent ask, how do we remove that barrier to create it for anybody, rather than making it a request or an accommodation request. Sorry. So that's kind of the process that we're seeing here in the U.S. Obviously, we're only embarking.
I'm going to jump in. We might have lost Carlos for a moment, but I think some really great points are being made about, I love what Carlos just said about thinking about what's coming up frequently and how do we use that to create universal accommodations, right, that can be in place. Carlos, are you back with us?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened.
No problem.
But
we're live.
Yeah, I was just finishing off with like, we are embarking this process in the U.S., and then looking to expand it to our restaurants and our other markets. So.
Great, thank you so much. And I don't know if you heard me, but I was just recognizing I really appreciate what you said about using data to identify universal accommodations that you can put in place. I think that's a really proactive strategy. And I think just everything you said about that term centralizing really makes me think of the word alignment and buy-in, and how we get everyone on the same page. Daryl, I saw you come off mute, so I just wanted to see if you wanted to add a thought there.
No, I was just going to say, I've learned so much already from this panel, but I want to publicly thank Carlos. He spent some time with me and my Wesco team sharing some of this stuff as well. So he's very accommodating, and we're really appreciative. And then one of the things I like about this work is that it's like I think you said, it's not proprietary. We're all in this together, and we're all willing to share and learn together. So I just wanted to just jump in and thank him publicly for doing that.
Thank you. And I think that's important that you did that, Daryl. I appreciate it, because that's what this is about, right? We have to learn from one another, connect, share ideas, elevate together, right? And move forward together. So I appreciate you mentioning that. And just to kind of come back to that piece of alignment, buy-in, getting on the same page, I think that's so important when we're thinking about sustainability in our practice and how do we keep moving things forward. And that really ties into engaging employees and also making sure that disability is really prioritized in those DE&I goals. And Daryl, you started to talk about this a little bit earlier, but at Wesco, you put a lot of intention in establishing your disability business resource group, the ABLE group. And I know that you really folded in that group's perspective to your long-term strategic plan. So tell us about what that has looked like.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. So first thing I'll say is that, at Wesco, we believe we have a great company. Like most of you who work for your companies are great. We believe that as well. The we want to become that employment destination for top talent around the world, right? So like every other company. So what does that suggest? We're all in a war for talent. So the best way we could win this war is to truly create ambassadorship of our employee base where they feel proud. They feel like this is a place that this is where they want to work, and they're willing to tell a friend and all that. And who better than your friend, your best friend, to say, yeah, I'm working in a pretty good company. You should check us out. So that's kind of our underlying sort of MO, so to speak. So the other thing I'll say to you is that we say inclusion and diversity very intentionally, because we believe that it's kind of like you're inviting people to a party and you have to get the house ready. That's what we're doing. We're getting our house ready before the guests come. So what we've done is, by creating these business resource groups and this ambassadorship, we are listening. We call our Voice BRG program the Voice on Purpose, because we're listening to our constituents, people who have a vested interest, who are passionate about this work, and we're allowing them to help shape how we as an organization show up, right, for them as employees and for candidates that are coming in. So as I said earlier, ABLE is our fifth one, very intentionally, because we really wanted to make sure that we had the collective mind power and budget and everything that we needed to truly make a difference in this space. So, and Carlos talked about it, I think Matthew talked about it. There's stigma associated with disability. We understand that. So what we wanted to do is try to allay or alleviate some of that stigma by creating a world where we're educating ourselves, understanding. So some people are fearful of saying the wrong things, and they don't understand the disability etiquette and all that. So we partnered again with Aspire, Disability In, McDonald's, anyone that's doing this well, so that we can understand ourselves and become that company that, again, we may make mistakes, but it's not intentional. We are learning and growing, as I said, in this space. But if everybody can be a little more astute in terms of how to handle this, then we're kind of setting the table. We're getting our house in order. At the same time, we know that the disability community is underemployed. We understand that there's people who are very capable, but there's something in the system, whether it be a bias or an ableist mentality, that's telling people what they can and can't do. So we understand that, and we're trying to help through the BRG and through our education to eliminate some of that sort of stuff. And so things that we're doing is like we're having like lunch and learns, we're encouraging self-advocacy. So yeah, I want you to believe what we're saying. So if you do have a need for an accommodation, let us know, and we'll work with you. We will get you the accommodations required. Yes, it's a little rocky, but we're getting there, and in a sincere way. We understand that we need benchmarking, right? So Disability In has been a fantastic organization to help us with that. We've done the Disability Equality Index. We're going to get some feedback. Our first survey may not be the greatest, but that's okay. We're going to take that as a basis of where we need to work from. And then, being part of a corporate entity, we're going to go back, and this goes all the way up to the CEO and the CHRO, and say, okay, so here's where we scored poorly. Here are the sort of things that we need to do to correct. It may involve an investment. It may involve training. Who knows what they say? And then I think Matthew talked about representation as well. There's a lot of things that we can do better, that we're just going to take that to really implement that. And as I said before, this is a journey. It's something that we are taking steps, and we're prepared. We're on this journey. We're happy to be on it, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. And we give ourselves grace, in the sense of, like, don't try to compare yourself to the best companies out there, because that'll be kind of demoralizing. Just acknowledge that you've come a long way, and just get up the next day and just take another step, and I think that goes a long way. So I don't want anyone to walk away to say Wesco's got it figured out, we're perfect. We're far from that, but I'm proud to say that we're on this journey, and we're willing to learn and work with anybody who's in the same space as we are.
Thank you, Daryl. Yeah, I think that mindset of incremental steps is so important, because that's how we get there. So thank you so much for sharing about those important pieces. And I love that you all are thinking big picture, right? You're engaging with the BRG to really engage those long-term goals, so that you are pushing yourself and holding yourselves accountable to keep moving forward and building on those. Absolutely. So thank you. So many of these examples you shared, they're really highlighting specific steps. We talked about thinking about setting foundations. That's what we really want to think about today, setting a strong foundation for recruiting, hiring. But that other piece that I know everyone has on their minds is retention. How do we continue to meet people where they are and continue to be places of belonging? So that question, how do we create cultures? Because we know culture is the key piece there, that embrace differences and create opportunities for growth and leadership for people with disabilities. What does that look like? It's a big question. JP, I love to hear your thoughts on this because I know you're leading a team and thinking about this a lot.
Yeah, Claire, thank you so much. So a little bit of context for us. Ernst & Young, 400,000 employees globally. I sit in our Chicago office, and we're still post-pandemic. Return to office is not a requirement for my team of 12 engineers, data analysts, and software testers, right? My team identifies as a data analyst or a software engineer. We sit in the Neurodiverse Center of Excellence in the Chicago location, one of 19 locations out of all of the Ernst & Young offices globally. We talked, Daryl mentioned the journey, and I am, our first trailblazing hire just a year and a half ago in the United States. Let me clarify that. In the United States, as someone who is neurodistinct, Katie, thank you for the work you do. As someone who is neurodistinct, I am also an executive with 20 years of experience in delivery. I'm a highly qualified career counselor, and I happen to be neurodistinct. And to get to live out my purpose professionally in life, to be a career counselor to individuals who also happen to identify with being neurodistinct, is huge. Now, culturally, the intentionality that Matthew mentioned, any employer needs to have to be neuro-inclusive in employment, that culture is backed by some strategic moves. And I'm going to list 4 of them for us. Number 1, and both Carlos and Daryl mentioned this, that they have in their organizations as well, we need to have executive sponsorship. Carmine DeCibio is on a first name basis with Hiren Shukla, the director who created the Neurodiverse Center of Excellence. Julie Boland sent us a thank you email. This is our US CEO, knows who we are, right? They've invested in us. Executive sponsorship is number 1. Number 2, when we look at an employee, attracting that employee and making space for that employee, specifically for neurodistinction, we needed to have neurodiverse individuals helping us identify what was broken about our recruiting process. Because when we focus first on behavioral within professional services, we're not going to accept someone like me who literally stutters, right? We might not accept someone who, like me, will look off and not make direct eye contact. These behavioral norms in our recruiting processes caused us to not see depth of acumen, incredible loyalty. We have the highest retention rate. We are at 94 plus in our retention rate of our employees, right? So neurodistinct informed on how do we adjust our recruiting process. That's number 2. Number 3 is, Matthew said it perfectly. He said beyond ADA requirements, beyond the compliance, even Carlos mentioned that, beyond compliance, we've got to take a look at what are the informal and formal accommodations that we as leaders make to our team members, right? So informally, professional services, we have phrases that we say, let's circle back. Now I say circle back to one of my autistic team members, and they will say, what do you mean by circle back? What do we mean by circle back? Well, we mean, can we talk about this again next Thursday. The assumed behavior is please schedule 15 minutes of time with me next Thursday so we can talk specifically about the topic that we just discussed. Professionally, the informal accommodation that I am making to my team members is I've lost a lot of jargon in coming to EY, and I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful for someone helping me understand their communication preference and helping me make those adjustments as a leader. It's super important. Now, the last fourth piece, and we can dive into this deeper, time permitting, the insights from all others, but I want to encourage an adoption of universal design for learning in all operations. Universal Design for Learning, its acronym UDL, is something that maybe our grade school teachers or junior high teachers or even higher ed are taking a look at. But when we look at a softer landing for our employees, as we apply, regardless of neurodistinction or other abilities, Universal Design for Learning allows for a really greater connection in communication, as well as ability for individuals to help others understand how they learn and do their best work. Those are the four with a couple of subsets. Culture with intention.
Thank you so much, JP. So much packed in there. And summed it up so well. Intention, culture with intention. I love that. And thank you for mapping those out. It's so important. That piece about communication and changing our own approaches as individuals too, when people we work with express how we can meet their needs and meet them where they are. That's such an important piece. So thank you all. These are so amazing. We have so many great examples. I appreciate you all sharing your learnings. I want to make sure we get to some of these audience questions. So I want to invite Matthew back on screen with us for the Q&A. So Matthew, come back on when you're able to. And if any of you want to jump in for these, feel free to just come off mute. Our first question here, and I'm going to give just a moment for Matthew to come back on, is going to get us thinking about environments, workplace environments. So specifically, what are some ways we can ensure our workplace environments are accessible? And when we're thinking about these environments, both in person and virtually, because both of those exist now in our world. So what are some accessible features that we can think about? Matthew, there you are. Want to help us out with this one, thinking about accessible environments?
Yeah, so sorry, I was having technical problems getting back on, but I'm here now. I think that there are a number of things that we can do, right? One of the areas I do within my work is assessments of spaces, not necessarily from an ADA perspective, right? Because as we know, the ADA is the bare minimum of what's required to make something accessible, but a more user-friendly approach to how do we lay out a space, right? Is it a matter of we have accessible, adjustable furniture in every aspect of the office space that we have so that anyone can go up to the furniture at any point? As a wheelchair user, I can push a button and it raises and lowers the desk that I may be approaching. Is it a matter of thinking about, like, do we have hardwood floors in our office or do we have rugs? Many people don't often think about the flooring that we use. And for people who have mobility aids, certain carpeting may allow or bring about some difficulty in navigating a space, depending on if there is a design in the flooring, right? Oftentimes, the example I often use is hotel spaces. If you're going down a hallway in a hotel space, there's often a design in the floor, and that will pull your wheelchair one way or another, depending on how the floor is designed, and you're often fighting against that design. And so hardwood floors, carpeting with less graphics in them, or just lower ply of the fabric, is captions on everywhere in all of your digital in all your TVs and digital aspects in your office. Do you have images of people with disabilities at your community service events, right? If we're saying that we want to be an inclusive space, show imagery of your employees with disabilities participating in community service outings and different things like that. If you do some of these basic things, right, you're instantly going to make that space feel more fully inclusive, and that will, in my opinion, certainly entice more people with disabilities to come work in that space.
Thank you, Matthew. JP, any added thoughts on accessible work environments?
Well, I'll tell you, some of it is awareness, and when we see behaviors as leaders, we see behaviors that make us say, "What's going on there?" Maybe to pause and not assume that it's wrong. Let me give you an example. I will be using a room that is typically designated just for breastfeeding. But I will be using that as a quiet space to remove the stimulation, destimulate the environment for myself, literally a quiet space, because of my sensory sensitivities. I am female. I present as female. But what if I were male? Now, could we open that room that is ADA required or typically required in all of our buildings and relabel it as a sensory room? That would be one tiny adjustment. Might be signage and a little bit of policy and a lot of awareness for coworkers to create that space, for quiet space.
Thank you, JP. Yeah, thinking outside the box, right? How do we work with spaces we have, make sure everybody has ways they can utilize, get their needs met? Thank you both for those examples. We have so many questions coming in. It's really exciting, but I'm sorry to those of you that we don't get to your questions. We're going to keep rolling and get to as many as we can. Next question, what are some ways organizations can make sure that applicants have an accessible interview process? So particularly if there's not a clear policy in place or they don't feel like they have support from leadership, what are some ways we can make that interviewing process more inclusive and accessible? Katie, any thoughts here?
Well, yeah, sure. Thanks, Claire. Great question. Like we talked about, right, that pipeline has to be strong and welcoming. I think there's a few things. And again, I think someone said, you need that executive sponsorship, or you need a champion in the organization. It's really tough without those things. So I think that's one place to start is how do you identify that person? How do you get kind of leadership on board with this? Besides that, though, what are other things you can do, whether you have that or not? Accommodations is a really interesting one to me. We always talk about when we get an employee, we want to provide the accommodations they need. But those same employees, when they're interviewing, also need those same accommodations. And so how do you put that out there as that, hey, we'd love to interview you, let us know what accommodations you need for the interview. I think that's critical, because we really want to test people for their skill set and for their abilities. And if we're not accommodating them in the interview process, we're not testing for those things. And just keeping in mind that it doesn't indicate disclosure, right? I think there's a very strong difference between accommodation and disclosure. Disclosure of a disability comes with trust in so many situations. And so that is not a requirement of an interview, absolutely not, but being able to advocate for yourself and saying what kind of accommodations you need in order to effectively do the interview is really important. Similar, when I think about the autism community, when I think of a lot of interviews, sending questions ahead of time. I never understood the reason why you want to know if I can think of an answer on the spot, when maybe I have a really good situation. I can explain myself really well if you just give me a little bit of a prompt, a little bit of a heads up, so I can think through what is the best scenario that I can use to articulate who I am and what my strengths are. sending agendas ahead of time. Who are you going to meet? Like, how can we remove some of the anxiety that comes with interviewing? So again, we can focus on the candidate that you are interviewing. I think those are some, really critical ways to just kind of rethink a little bit your interview process. And I guess the last thing I'll say is just really thinking about communication style. So again, not all of us have verbal communication as our strongest communication style. And so like, what are other ways? Like if that job isn't going to entail, my needing to use a lot of verbal communication, what are other ways that you can test for competencies in the interview? So really aligning the interview and what you're testing for with the job description, I think is really important too.
Thank you, Katie. So much packed in there as well. Appreciate that. Anybody want to add anything on to that?
Yeah, Claire, it's Daryl.
Yeah, go ahead, Daryl.
I just wanted to add that, in the spirit of getting your house in order, I think you guys, everything that Katie said, we're doing that. We're inviting people to let us know that they need an accommodation, but we also have to ensure that our hiring managers and those doing interviews are prepared for what's to come. And, so we're spending a lot of time, giving them interview tips and ensuring the right way to ask questions and everything that Katie just mentioned. That, hey, we got to spend that time to get our people who are bringing talent into the organization to adjust their style and adjust their kind of view of the world in order to be truly accepting of difference and truly accepting of somebody who may not be prototypically who they've been used to interviewing, right? So that takes some work because you're breaking down some of those dynamics, but that's the work that the BRG is helping us with, and our allies and our executive sponsorship. Like I just wanted to add that that's another important element to this, to truly make it an inclusive process for diverse candidates.
Thanks, Daryl. I just want to say that I second that wholeheartely, that training throughout at every level, right? And I think it was mentioned somewhere in the chat or the QA as well, that training of colleagues and of hiring managers, and kind of how do we get those executive sponsorships to trickle down so that it really does become that culture of inclusivity. Absolutely.
And just to hit real quick on something Katie said even further, thinking about experiential interviews, right? So that someone can show, like, I don't have to verbally tell you that I can do this job. I can show you that I am capable of doing this job. So setting up scenarios where they're combing through a data set and they have to, pull out what's important, or, if you're cooking something, you have to show, that you're able to do the job. So, not everyone is going to be successful in a traditional interview. So figuring out, okay, what's another way that we can interview someone, and if they can show that they are capable of doing the job, that's, should just be as qualified as a traditional interview.
Thank you, Matthew. So the next question we have here are something, JP, you were speaking to before. What are tips for supervisors and how they can be flexible to their team members' needs? So JP, I don't know if you want to add some of those initial thoughts, and anyone else.
Yeah, thank you for the question. There have been times, every manager or coworker has had a moment where they say, here's the situation, here's the behavior, here's the impact for me, right? And there's either a point of contention or that is something different. The assumption may be that is potentially wrong. That's not how we do it here. And the question that I would ask us to ask ourselves, and then also ask the person, is, here's the situation, here's the behavior, this is how it's landing for me, but help me understand, what am I missing? And then ask the question, what do you need? If we took every performance eval that we had ever done and go there, give the feedback immediately, by the way, and go there, we would make those micro adjustments that actually create the equitable and inclusive environment more frequently. and it would become natural.
Thank you, JP. Appreciate that. Any other thoughts on this piece, being flexible in our approaches? And I think you make a great point. How do we make it become second nature, right? And a part of our culture and our process. Katie?
This is probably it's an example that we use that we've had to adapt, and I think communication with your supervisor is critical. And so on behalf of the employee, I think having daily check-ins, and I know that a lot of supervisors are like, I don't have time to do this daily check-in, but think about ways that you can do that. Is there a digital daily check-in? Is there a just a little form where someone can check in both on their workload, right? What questions do I have about my workload? How am I feeling about my workload? But also their accommodations. I think we have learned through our consult work in the inclusive employment space that some people, the accommodations they request when they originally become an employee are not the accommodations they need throughout the year. We work with museums that have such seasonality that the accommodation I request as a museum employee in the middle of February is a lot different than the accommodations I need in the middle of summer when there's crowds everywhere. So I think that open line of communication, you as a supervisor need to find a way that you have a checkpoint with these employees that need it to check in with them on a really daily or at least very frequent basis. And I think the other thing that does is a lot of times we see for some of the autistic employees that we have supported, that if they have that consistency that I know every day when I get to work, the first thing I'm going to do is this same thing, it just kind of starts the day off right. It starts that workload off right, versus coming in and being like, well, today I have a meeting or today I need to do this work and today I need to do that work. I think anytime that we can create consistency in what could be a chaotic work environment is really, really, really critical. So as a supervisor, I think taking on some of that responsibility to build those systems of consistency and of open communication can be really helpful.
Great, thank you both. We have another question here. Someone's asking, or stating rather, I realize that disability comes in all different forms, some visible, some not. As an employee, how do you ensure you're being treated fairly if your disability is not visible? Any thoughts on this from the group? JP?
I live with my silent disability. There's two elements to this. And being treated fairly is, I apologize, there's two elements of it for me. One, treated fairly is, have I identified even for myself what I need to bring my best self to work and what work environment I need, right? So do I even know what I need? And I mean that sincerely, because I was a late in life diagnosis and I would be at the point of burnout and then realize, oh, hey, my performance is suffering. Yeah. So it's part of it is on me as the person who may need to just realize, what do I even need, right? So that I can articulate it. Then the other piece is make your choices on what route you take. There's every employer, there's going to be that compliance-based accommodation request. There's also, as we've described and you've heard in a couple of examples here, there's, can you speak to your immediate supervisor and talk about what you might need in that moment? So that's the fairness angle, is knowing self so that you can articulate, and then do you take a formal or informal approach? Because I'll tell you this, we have a right to declare what our definition of fair and equitable is. we have a right to declare that.
Thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing your personal experience, JP. Daryl, I see you want to add a thought.
Yeah, this is a great question. You know, the fact that you're asking the question speaks to the fact that maybe the environment is, you know, we like to say this, like you said earlier, this is a safe space, but is that just words, or are we sincere in that? I talked about when I spoke about the stigma attached to disability, like if all those things are pinging around and somebody doesn't feel that feel safe to disclose that they need accommodation, and they're just coming to work wearing that mask every day, and just like JP said, and struggling and getting to that point of burnout, that's where we need to deal with. So the employee has to feel, and while I say, yeah, you should disclose, you can't just say that in an abyss. Like there needs to be intentionality in creating the environment where the employee does feel safe, and that it's not going to be career limiting, or it's not going to be, you know, ostracized in some sort of way. And if the employee isn't feeling that way, then they're never going to disclose. So the organization and the hiring manager and the peers around have to play a role in that and help creating that space that anybody, if we're truly saying this is a safe space and we're welcoming for everybody and bring your full and authentic self to work, if we're truly sincere in saying that, then there's work that needs to be done from an intentional perspective. So we need to look at ourselves in the mirror. When you get a question like that, where somebody's, you know, wondering if I'm being treated fair, that speaks volumes to me, where you need to actually do some work in the environment that allows somebody not to ask that question and know wholeheartedly that, yeah, you know, I have no problem coming forward, and I know I'll be treated fairly. I'll be given more time and grace to complete an assignment. I won't be, you know, snickered at. There won't be microaggressions, all those sort of things, right? So that's just something I'm picking up from that question, just to piggyback on what JP was saying.
Yep, and coming back to that culture piece again, Daryl, thank you for bringing it back there. That's the key piece here. And are we creating that safe space that's continually safe? And someone actually then asked, on the flip side, thinking about that visible disability experience, how do you ensure you're being treated fairly if you have a visible disability? And Matthew, I see you coming off mute.
Yeah, so as somebody that, as soon as I roll into a room, you know that I have a disability based on my wheelchair, I do think it's very important to constantly have an open line of dialogue with your supervisor, with your, you know, your direct reports that you may be connecting with, right? I love what Daryl said in terms of creating that space where you feel welcome to say, hey, like, because for me, again, instantly, you know, I'm disabled. So like, you don't know what my accommodations may be. You don't know specifically what my disability is, but you instantly know, okay, like there might be some extra needs here. And so setting up a space where I can freely and openly have a conversation with my supervisor to say, yes, I have disabilities. It will not affect, you know, my ability to do my job if I get accommodations that will support me to do that job. If that is the standard that is set up immediately, right, I'm going to feel more comfortable to have that initial conversation. But then as new accommodations arise and new things pop up, I will already have that solid rapport with my direct report, with whomever, you know, I would go to for accommodations or anything else, to say, all right, something new has come up. How can we adjust this? And so, but you don't do that if you're not regularly and consistently having an open line of dialogue and an open door policy both ways, right? Between the manager and me as the employee, to say, hey, something's not right here. What can we do to solve this problem? And that's just a matter of being consistent in a dialogue, right? And for me as the employee, sort of being respectfully stubborn to a certain extent, right, to make that happen.
Thank you, Matthew. Any other thoughts on that physical disability, visible disability piece from the group? So we have about 5 minutes left. So I want to get to sort of a wrap-up question. And I think this is a good one for us to sort of end on. What are the biggest lessons learned during your efforts to seek out, hire, and retain individuals with disabilities at your companies? So would anybody like to share, a personal or a company-wide, lesson learned on any of your journeys? JP, thanks for starting us off, and then Daryl will come to you.
Thank you. I celebrate my employer, and I celebrate the journey that we're still on. Yeah. We practice not about us without us. As they hired me into the US leadership team, as they continue to hire at all levels, we have representation, and I'm grateful for that. So let's not embark on creating a disability inclusion agenda without seeking the support and guidance from leaders like Matthew, like Katie, who literally ask those of us with the disabilities, how do we make this more inclusive? That's my guidance. Yeah.
Thank you, Daryl, and then Matthew will come to you.
So it's Daryl. So from my learnings, when I first started this BRG journey, I was really concerned about, well, am I doing the opposite effect of what I really want by creating these kind of groups within the cafeteria and school? If you imagine that, I'm putting, the people of color, the women together, the pride group together. And I was thinking, like, what am I doing here? That's the opposite of what we're trying to create. And then I started realizing through their efforts that it's really an intersectional work. And we haven't really touched about intersectionality, but the reality is everybody's diverse. There's everybody that has some level of dimension of diversity. So we're all in this together, regardless of, while going deep is important, but recognizing that we got to go broad as well. And one thing I can tell you from a Wesco perspective, like the BRGs work together and they collaborate through so many different issues. They're working on various issues. So it's been a real lesson for me as I'm going through my personal journey to say, it's going deep and understanding is important to understand, like we talked about, what's really in the hearts and minds of the various constituents, but recognizing too that people are mosaic, people are diverse, and there's so many dimensions to humanity that we can't do it alone. Right. So having a conversation right now, and I am able-bodied, thankfully, knock on wood, but guess what? Tomorrow I may not be. And everything that we're doing in this space helps humanity. It helps everyone be better. Like I use automatic doors all the time. I read closed captioning all the time. Like it's not just for disabled people, it's for everyone, right? We're making the world a better place by doing this work. So it's been a huge lesson. And anybody who's in this space, I think will tell you the same thing. It's rewarding. I have so many passionate people that work for us that are in the same boat as me, and they're giving up their time on top of their day jobs to do this work. And I celebrate it every day. I appreciate them every day. And I think that's my biggest lesson. I didn't grow up saying I'm going to be the I&D leader for Wesco. That wasn't my career projection, but I fell into this role, and I'm so happy that I can, operate and help in this different capacity. So, thanks for that.
Thank you, Daryl, and thanks for bringing up that important word, intersectionality. I think that's a really important term for people to leave with and to think more about and discover and explore more as well. And Matthew, I want to give you a chance to maybe give us some closing thoughts before I wrap.
Yeah, I'm going to be very brief, right? Because I think when we think about employment, right, and I love all of the organizations that are on this call with me and with all of us today, right? But I think one of the things that we also don't talk about in terms of employment is entrepreneurship as a potential way for people with disabilities to find employment, right? There are multiple ways to sort of skin the employment cat. You can work with these amazing organizations that we have represented on the call, or you can find a path like I have, not to say that I would never not work with, these lovely organizations on the call. You can find your own path, right? And you can make your own history. So I think it's really important in these conversations that we also talk about entrepreneurship as a potential pathway for employment for our community as well.
Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate that. There has been so many great takeaways. I can't thank you all enough for being a part of this. We unfortunately have to wrap the program and bring everything to a close here. I just want to share a few final notes. As I just said, my sincere thanks extended to each of our panelists today, Matthew, Daryl, Katie, JP, and Carlos. Thank you so much for being a part of this. We'd also like to thank our access service providers, again, First Choice Interpreting and Efficiency Reporting. I want to recognize the Fred J. Bruner Foundation, whose generous support makes programs like this possible. And finally, thank all of you for choosing to give your time to join in today's session. Do us a favor, take what you learned here today with you, put it into action. Start conversations in your workplace, envision the possibilities, and start making plans. So know that we're here to support you. Stay connected with us at aspirechicago.com. And finally, if you could, we'd ask you to kindly complete our audience feedback survey and let us know about your experience. You can access that link in the chat now. It will also pop up for you when we close this session in just a few minutes. Until next time, from all of us at Aspire, thanks for being with us and for your commitment to building more inclusive communities. Have a great day, everyone.
Sky blue text over a dark blue background. Inclusive Hiring Essentials. Foundational steps for recruiting, employing, and retaining people with disabilities. Presented by Aspire. Learn more at aspirechicago.com. Speakers. Host and moderator, Claire Killey, Aspire. Keynote speaker, Matthew Shapiro, Six Wheels Consulting, LLC. Panelists, Daryl Castellano, Wesco International Incorporated. Katie Hench, Infiniteach. Jennifer J.P. Price, Ernst & Young. Carlos Terrazas, McDonald's Corporation. Event Planning and Accessibility. Technical assistance from Aspire, Josephine Breilack, Drew Weinstein, and Eli Rupplinger, ASL Interpretation. First Choice Interpreting. CART, Communication Access Real-Time Translation, Efficiency Reporting. Video Editing, Captioning, and Audio Description, BridgetMelton.com. This program was made possible thanks to generous support from the Fred J. Bruner Foundation.